It looks like the broadcast was deleted. What? Create a new broadcast or
No.
remove the destination from remove and re-edit. No.
No, but it's already live. It's working on YouTube.
Yeah, but Facebook is gone. So let me remove and re-edit. Uh, how do I? Let me. What? Hang on. How do I do this? It looks like this broadcast was deleted on Facebook. To stream to Facebook, create a new broadcast. So remove this destination from broadcast and re-edit. Remove, delete,
Okay.
and re-edit like that. July. I'm wondering if anyone is listening. Well, Haas is not here, so we can't start, right? He said he wants to go first.
Where is he?
Is anyone live? Hang on. Save changes and you are live. Yay. Okay. So we're technically live. And Haas, go to the Ruby My Slack. There is a StreamYard link for you.
Where is he
speaking? Let me just ping you.
I just realized like the stream, I think in YouTube, I think both in Facebook maybe, like we're showing. Oh, okay.
Yes, we are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube.
Okay. Then I'm trying to update the Meetup link in YouTube and it's not allowing me to update.
Okay, Hans, I'm gonna WhatsApp you the link in case you don't check Slack.
We have 2 comments. He's on YouTube and
yeah.
Okay.
Wait, let me check YouTube. No. Let me check YouTube.
He said
because I don't want it to be another one that I can't, like, people can't comment.
I don't think the comment is there. It's just chat. I tried to look at the settings earlier before we went live. I don't think there's like an option for you to like change anything at all.
Yeah, chat should be working, right?
Yeah, chat's working.
Yeah,
just no comments.
Because the first one that we tried didn't allow chat for some reason. So now Jimmy finally figured it out.
Yay! Okay. So if you're listening, us, we have already pinged you. I've sent you the link.
Yay, he's here.
Hello,
Haas.
Hey guys, how are you?
I'm good. Seems to be laggy. Hang on.
Hey.
I'm on VPN. Oh no.
I'm very well. Is it just the 4 of us?
Or just the 4 of us on presentation. And it's a free-for-all for YouTube Live and Facebook. Why do we have so many Jimmys?
Sorry, I disconnected from VPN and it just froze. Everything just died. Okay, let me just check the crowd quickly so that we can have some audience. Wise? Wuhan is commenting.
Oh, wait.
Did you add the link
Is this
on
Wuhan?
like the meetup?
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't show. He hasn't allowed Facebook to use his likeness. So that's why it's just a Facebook user to us.
Okay, all right.
Probably have to log into Facebook.
Yes, we have 3 viewing. I don't know whether it's all of us. And 3 watching also on YouTube. So probably 2 uh, viewers are us. It's okay. It's okay. We can start, right? We can start. Everyone's here. It's we can play back anyways. Alrighty. What should I do? Okay. Let me let me get the thing. Wait, I didn't get my slide thing running.
Oh, hello, Diab. You also never allowed Facebook to use your likeness, so nobody else can see your your comment and your face. But it's nice
So
to see you too.
yeah, nice to see you. Who's that?
Diab, this is Diab.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oops.
I have to log into Facebook because I'm not logged into this computer on Facebook. Less distractions, but now you're forcing me to log in.
Okay. By the way, there is a chat room on uh, Ruby Malaysia. Just go to the Ruby Tuesday channel if you want a voice chat. If not, then just text chat will be fine. I'll be reading comments from there as well. Uh, Hoping this to be a little bit interactive, since because I have like almost no slides and rely on you on interactions to fill my time. Okay, let's get the show running. I will do some things first. Hans, you wanted to go first, right?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, then. Let me share my screen for a while. Tab. There we go. Oops. All right. Oops. This is 72. This is the old one. Let's ignore this. Alrighty. Welcome to Ruby Tuesday 72, everyone. And this event is proudly brought to you by Engineers My, who is sponsoring this StreamYard account. And we are the Care Ruby Brigade. We are on Facebook. We have a website. Go check us out. We are mostly on Meetup.com, so check out all our events there. Stay tuned to any events. Hopefully, after this RMCO is over, we can meet in person. I'm not so sure though. I'm not so sure. Let's see how safe we feel after the RMCO is over. But yeah, in the meantime, all meetups probably still be online. We have a GitHub account. Go check it out if you want to. We are also on Slack, so get yourself invited to Ruby My Slack, and we can hang out there as well. Oops, nope. Okay, so who's online now? So I'm Jimmy. So we have Haas, we have Paris Grid, and we have Grid. Paris Grid is Tristan. Say hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Yep. And please join our Discord. The link is down there scrolling. So if you don't know the link, it's there. It's bit.ly/Ruby Tuesday chat. It will bring you to the Discord channel. Let's try to limit to either Facebook, YouTube, or Discord. It's already 3, so we'll see how. Yes, Discord.
Yeah. Ruby, Discord, or Facebook or Slack.
The Discord name is called Ruby Malaysia. If you want to search for it. Yes, Discord. Yes. Okay. Right. So if you have any hiring shout out, please ping us, and I'll do a hiring shout out afterwards. But yeah, nobody sent me beforehand, so I have no hiring shout out now. So yeah, do let me know in the chat if you have any. And yes, without further ado, let's go to the talks today. We have three talks today. The first one will be by Haas. It's talking about proactive record. Uh, and I'm going to talk about JWT and device. Oops, I
Yeah,
don't know
definitely.
why.
I'm not giving a talk.
Oh, sorry. And CDK setup for Ruby on Rails. Is Kate here?
I don't think he's here yet. I'll try to reach out to him.
Yeah, so let's see whether he'll be able to join us afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, let's go to Haas. Haas, I'll let you have the screen.
Hey, let me go ahead and share my screen.
And we'll
Let me help
just.
you. Wait, just give me 1 second.
Let me hide this. Should I hide this? Probably not.
Okay, no, you cannot see my screen.
Yes, I can see
All
the
right,
screen.
can you guys see my screen now?
Yeah, I should
All
remove
right,
myself.
say that again.
I should remove myself. So, but you won't be able to listen to me.
All
Anyways,
right,
okay.
let me know when I should start.
Where did he go?
You can
You good
start
to
now.
go?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Hi, everybody.
cool.
My name is Haas, and today I would like to talk to you about Active Record. I thought since we're trying to add a little bit more to Active Records, just a little bit more than the usual, we're going to call it Proactive Records. So this is to keep in mind what kind of optimization we want to make. Some of them are really small, but some of them are going to be really interesting. So we're going to take a look at them just now. All right, let's do it. So first off, what is Rails Active Records? So according to the documentation, it is the layer in the app that is responsible for representing business data and logic. So this is quite important. There are two distinctions here: that business data, which refers to the whatever that we store in the database, and of course the logic is business logic. And this is where a lot of like the confusion between the repository pattern always happens. But again, according to Rails, this is where you should put your stuff. So the second thing is it facilitates the creation and the use of business objects. So anything that requires a persistent storage in the database, Active Record should be the layer that handles this transaction. Also, very important about Rails Active Record is that it is an implementation of the Active Record pattern. So it's important to distinguish that there are two different things here. One is that there's the Active Record library in Rails, and then there's the Active Record pattern. So let's take a look at what the Active Record pattern is. So what is an Active Record? So this term was first coined by Martin Fowler in his book, Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture. This book was written in 2002 and fairly recent, but it uses this term and has like objectively created this concept of an active record. And this is implemented quite widely in many different ORMs. So an active record is an object that wraps a row in either a database or a table or view. So the representation of a table row or like a view row inside of your application as an object is an active record. So this is the pattern that converts whatever objects that you have in SQL, and then it goes ahead and creates an object for them. That is an active record. So if you have ever developed in like different programming languages, I'm very sure everybody has, and especially like coming from a background of Java and PHP. So without using an ORM, you will query these rows in your database, and you will eventually interact with arrays or even hashes or tables. And that is really, really not a very good way of going about it. So an active record solves that, where it tells you that you should encapsulate a row into an object. Okay, and an active record should also encapsulate the database access. So this is the same thing that Rails has mentioned just now in its documentation, that the domain logic, the business logic, and the data should both be handled by the active record. All right. So having said that, there are two factions to it. One is, our interaction with the database, and then the business logic. So Rails does that all in one fell swoop, and sometimes it becomes a little bit blurry as to where SQL starts, where does Ruby begin, where are the lines in between these things. So we're going to take a look at a few different options to show you when to use SQL and when that can be a little bit more useful than Ruby. All right, so let's take a look at our first example. The first example uses limit. So one thing that you should always take into consideration is that you never want to go ahead and load more rows than you need. So this is extremely important. Only load the information that you need. So when you do reservations.present, what you are saying is that, hey, I'm going to load all of the reservations, and I'm check if this array is present. Okay, this does not change. This does not use an SQL like a limit. This gives you all of the records that are going to be loaded, and this also actually loads the records from the database and also converts it casts them into like the objects that you want. So in this example, this is going to go ahead and create an active record relation, and inside of it is going to be an active record model for each one of these reservations. And only on that do we say present. The alternative is, like I'm sure many of you know, it is exists. So what the exist does is that it checks for the validity or the presence of one record. If I can find one record, it means your association exists, because essentially we want to just know if there's one or more records. So if we can satisfy this knowledge by just having one, so exist does that for us with the limit. It sets a limit and then it checks on the count. Okay, I've benchmarked quite a bit of the code that we're going to be showing today, and this is the first one. If you can see, we're only going to look at real time. So this is like the most accurate bench that we're going to use today. If you can see, like there is almost a 2 times like speed increment by just using like present to exist. And also keep in mind that this benefit will keep going up. The more reservations you have, the higher that time is going to be. But if you have optimized your database records to use exist, that's always going to be constant, because we're only going to always be looking for just one record. Okay, let's look at the next one. Enumerables. This is something that we do a lot of the time. We do find, detect, select, order, and all of that. And the key takeaway here is don't let Ruby do what your database can do for you. And it's always very, very important to remember which command or like which active record method is calling on SQL and your database, and which one of it is calling onto your Ruby commands, like your Ruby enumerables. So this is also like something I've seen a lot in production, is instead of using order, we use sort by. And by the way, if you see that I've mapped ID at the end, that's to ensure that all records are loaded and not just lazy loaded. So if you see the comparison in this time, it is extremely drastic. So this gives us about a 25, I don't know, like maybe 20, 18 times faster, somewhere in that region. And that is quite significant. So SQL and your database can help you do this before you even get these records into Ruby. So you need to always keep in mind that this is a much better way, much faster way, and this is what you want to be doing all the time. There are many, many things that you can do with SQL. So some of them are covered here, some of them are not, but keep in mind, what do I want to do with this data? can I format the data how I want it to be formatted before it even shows up in my query? A lot of the time, the answer is yes. So let's take a look at more examples. Having. So there's this aggregate function that is called having, where it lets you query things that are not really queryable. Or like the aggregate function, like we want to know which user has more than one reservation. So imagine this is the example that we have is like this is a booking system and a user has many reservations. And we're trying to send out maybe like a reminder or like a report or whatever it is. But we just want to know that a user that has had more than one reservation. Again, we're using select here, and this select is not to be confused with the active record select. This select is an enumerable method that goes over each one of these rows individually and only picks out the ones that match the clause in the block given. In this example, our block is user.reservations.count is more than 0. So we want a user that has had at least one reservation. The thing about this right now is that we do not need the reservation rows. We never need to load them. But in this example, when we do user.all and then we go over each one of them, first of all, this creates an n+1 query, where every single time that we are querying a single user, we are also querying all of their reservations just to get the count. So the first trick that we can do here is to check exist. That's going to help quite significantly in terms of like reducing the number of queries on all of the reservations to just one. So that could help as well, but that does not solve the n+1 query. So what we can do in this example is we can use having, and then we join. Once we join on reservations, we will immediately be able to figure out like which user has more than one reservation, because first of all, the join is going to be, like a left join on the table. And we also want somebody that has, a count of more than one. So in this example, I wanted it more than one, but the top one is more than 0. Regardless, this will be the exact same way that you would do it. And the difference in these two queries is I can't even say the word drastic anymore. It's unreal. It is 1,000 times slower, which is like completely weird. We wouldn't want to do that on a production environment where we are just constantly querying the database. One that will hold up your connections. The more constant connections that you have that are actively being used by other connections, like this is slowing down like your queries. If all of your connection pool is being used, all of the resources in it, users will have to wait until another one frees up. So imagine if you are trying to figure out the number of reservations and put it as a badge on every single page that you load. And this is going to be extremely time consuming on the database and not something that we want. So again, always figure out, do I need to load these records? Because one, instantiating an active record object is really expensive. In comparison, what we can do is we can have these aggregate functions that will just load the correct data that we need before even loading all of them. So this is pretty cool. Let's look at the next one. All right. So another thing about SQL and Active Record, it's like there are many ways for you to count associations. And a lot of the times we rely on preloading a bunch of records and then loading another set of records with them and then counting it from there. No bueno. What we want to be able to do is to go ahead and let the database do the counting for us. And as you will see, there are actually many different ways that SQL will let you do the counts, and it's really quite powerful. Okay, so we look at our first active record. So the first thing is we want to figure out how many users have checked in. So we want to know how many reservations did they have in total, and also how many of those reservations have been checked in. Checked in reservation is when you come into the studio and someone says like, all right, you have arrived, and like they figured out your attendance. Okay, so we want to just know all of the users, and we do a left outer join. So why would we want to do a left outer join? Is because we want to load all of the reservation records as well, so we can figure out what is the total count that we're going to be loading. Okay, so we do a left outer join on reservations, and then we do our select. So very important is that when you want to aggregate something in a group, you must include it in your select statement. So in this example, we are going to use the ID of the users to aggregate what is the total number of counts that they've had, and we go. So in the first row, you can see right here, what happens is that we can do checked in at. Instead of saying reservations.id in the second row, because this will be a truth check. So if we go ahead and checked in at, if this is nil or any null value, this will not come off as a valid check at a valid one. So this will be considered 0. If the value is nil or null or whatever it is in the database, that is, like not set to be a valid, not valid, like an empty kind of field, this will count as 0. This is very important. Whenever we do count reservations.id, it is a present value, and hence it counts it as one. So like for every single one, it's going to go up by 1 by 1 by 1. And at the same time, we're going ahead, and when we want to check for the checked in at, we don't want to include the ones that are nil. So that's why if we have, like the checked in count only takes the ones that have been updated with the date, and the one that says reservation.id is going to count the total. So we can see from the bottom right here, we have one check-in count with one reservation. So we'll know all of their reservations have been checked in. So it's pretty powerful. So if we have a field that is like a status in this example, what this example is the status. So we want to know what is the status of this reservation. Okay, has it been canceled or not? So the existing status is usually active. And then what we want to check for is canceled. So we cannot just do count, like on the status field, because there's always going to be a present value, a string value. Okay, so what we can do in this instance is that we can use a case statement. This case statement will check whether the status is canceled. If it is canceled, then it will consider it as 1. Else, no. You can also set a 0 right here. So when it starts adding onto the counter, it's going to go ahead and add 1 for canceled and nothing for, like the ones that aren't set as canceled. And if you look right at the bottom, like we know that the total reservation is 4, and then there 2 of them are canceled. Okay, so this is a very, very, very powerful way of trying to get more aggregate functions and not to have to preload and then just say user.reservations.cancel.count. And then right next to it is user.reservations.active.count. So this is gonna help us query the database in one single transaction, in one single statement, and we will be able to get the data before even loading it into active record. And if you look at the second query that we have right down here, we do not this is a Postgres specific like a function called filter. So filter is just an easier way of like writing that case statement that we had up there. Instead of saying like case when status is canceled, we can just use filter where status is canceled. It accepts any kind of where clause in here. So we will see what more we can do with this filter. Both of these queries are exactly the same and they behave exactly the same. So like you can use it cross-platform. All right, let's take a look at time. So this is also something else that is used quite a lot in many of the different places that we query. And a lot of the times we fall back onto the application to supply the time, which is all well and good, but there are many different places that we may not be able to do that. So if you look at the select statement that we have in the first row, we are unable to parse an argument like we do with the where clause into here. So one is that we can either like clean up the query here before in another object and pass it into the select, or what we can do is we can rely on like the database's knowledge of time. So if we can do current date current date -7, so this will give us from 1 week ago. It says 7 here, but then there are many different intervals that you can do. So there's a command in PostgreSQL where you can use intervals. So you can say like 7 minutes, 7 hours, 7 years, whatever it is. And Postgres is also aware of time zone. So we can just pass in the time zone and say like, hey, give me all these records that have been created from 7 days ago at this time zone. And this will give us the recent reservations count. Again, very, very easy. Things that we do not really rely on, the database for. It's extremely powerful, it's extremely fast, and it's available already. This is something that is a prominent feature in your stack. No application that you're running in production, almost none. 99.999% of all of us are running applications backed by a database. And this power comes straight up out of the box, nothing added, nothing done, just for you to use. And a lot of times I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times I just ignore it and like I don't use it as much as I can. There are a lot more daytime functions that you can do. One is that you can look at the documentation and just see what are the daytime functions, but you can also see something as easy as give me the age of these records. So like I want to know, when were these users created and how long, what is the age of this account? And this will immediately just give it to us like, 11 months, 8 days, 4 hours and 30 minutes, like down to the second. Okay, so nothing that we need to go ahead and recalculate on each different time. The database does a lot of it for us.
The age is the column age or the row
The
age?
column age, yeah. So like the created ad is from that date up until the time that it was created, yeah. So from now until that created ad date. So this will give us like straight up 11 months and 8 days since this was created. There are many ways that you can do, and like it's not useful for me to list all of them down. Like this link will serve you better. Something that I really love using, two things that I really love using Postgres for is JSON-B fields and arrays. I really love the array functionality. And one thing that would really help me speed up this reservation is if I can, figure out which row includes which array, like which array includes which value. Okay, and Postgres makes it really simple that you can say like, hey, give me the one that overlaps. There are many ways you can say like, give me the one that matches exactly, give me the ones that don't have these values in the array. So all well and good. There's a lot of different things. Again, we always fall back on looping and saying, does this array include these values? We shouldn't. We can just query the data that we need to use. So when I want to know which arrays overlap with these arrays, boom, give me just these ones. I should not have to do a lot of enumerable functions and a lot of methods that are unwanted after I've loaded the data. The data that I load should, in an ideal world, the data that I load should be the data that I want. And this will help us.
Sorry, can you go back? I have a question.
Okay.
What is this? Is this an array intersection?
Yep.
Operation? Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is the int thing? It's just
you are casting this as an integer array, like an array of integers.
Okay.
So so this will give you extremely fast accuracy.
All right. Cool.
All right. So very important. Like we're looking at all of these things. The database is really powerful, really good, really all knowing. But we need to remember, not all database functions are better. So if just because something the database does it in a certain way doesn't mean that it's automatically a faster, better way of approaching it. And sometimes the results will speak for itself. Let's take a look at, say I want to figure out what users were registered for, in the last 1 month. So if you look at two different ways, one is that we can, give it a time array. It's just like, hey, from the beginning of the month to the end of the month, give me that number. Or we can say, hey, figure out the month, truncate, date trunc will just return you the integer of the month, and it'll be like, okay, get this value and then just give me that date. So just trying to figure out the date from this thing is actually a little bit slower. So what we maybe use this date trunc as like a field that we want to read from, as a function that we want to read from, not necessarily query from. Maybe like in this example, like querying a date range is still faster than trying to figure out what month and then only then querying that date. So again, just keep in mind that just because the database does it doesn't mean it's faster. Usually there's another way that the database will still do it faster for you. All right, so another one, there are a lot of different things that we can also do. This was an interesting thing that I've picked up from production as well. And no value is value. So we want to figure what that is in the database. There's a lot of data types in the database that also does this for you, where it represents a no value as a value. Let's take a look at the example here. We have a report and we want to figure out what reservations happened between the time period given. Straightforward enough, we have a start time, end time. We figure out all of the reservations, and if there's a start time, we're going to query by the start time, anything more than this, and then if there's an end time, anything less than that. Okay, pretty easy. First thing off the bat, it's like we have plenty of if statements that are just jumping around everywhere, and if you go back, there's like a total of 4. So, and 2 things are happening. 2 things that I really don't like to happen at the same time are happening together. One is that we are trying to cast this time and date range and right with the controller, which is not always very good. And at the same time, we also don't know which one we have, which one we don't have. So this is always a sign that we're missing some type of abstraction. And I've spoken about this exact abstraction a billion times before. And if you remember it, it's like if you have a start date, end date. So this is like a coupling of the data. So if I have a start date, I want to have an end. Sorry, if I have a start time, I want to have an end time too. So this is, like this is missing an abstraction where these things always follow each other. And in this example, this is going to be a date range. Given this date range, I just go ahead and create a date range object and say like, hey, if there's a start time, parse it. If not, give me the current time. So that would be the start time, anything from now. And then if there's no end time, just give me 1 month from now. Okay, and then we go back to our reservation records. And now it's much more simplified. We say, hey, this is the date range that we want to look at. And then give me this query. These are 2 actually different queries that you can write the same way, where we can say, hey, give me the reservations that are more than the date range start at, and then less than, like the date range end time. Or we can also write it in this manner where it's like we pass a date range to the query, and that gives us. So this is all well and good. And this is a lot of the time the approach that you want to have in your application. But one thing that really stands out about it, which kind of is annoying, time.current and 1 month from now, these are extremely arbitrary dates. What makes you think that the default should be 1 month from now? Say, okay, now we want to extend it to say, if there's no start time or end time given, give me all of the records. What we have to do is that we're going to have to start overriding the default params. We're going to have to add more params and do all of that crap. But there's a much better way. Good for us. We can use infinity. So a lot of the times when we want to query something, we want to say like, hey, give me a date range from this one to this one. And infinity is the default. So if there's no default right before that, so they'll be like from the start of time till the end of time, give me all of this if nothing is passed. So, and if there's, like a start time is passed, we'll be like, hey, just give me anything from July onwards. So the query is going to be from July until infinity, which is, actually it's not queried in the database, it's omitted. So if we look down here, now we're back to one query that has very, very little to do with the time range. So it has no knowledge of it, and we're always passing it a time range. So this is a no value. Sometimes we have no values, but there really are infinite values that we want to use. So now that we have cut 4 different if statements out of what we have had before in the controller, so the controller knows nothing about the parsing of the time, the start of the time, the logic behind it. It just knows like, hey, if I give you these 2 params, I'm going to figure out the date range one way or another. You're going to do that for me. Again, this is tell, don't ask. We don't ask the date range like, hey, do you have start time? We should add it to the query. Do you not have start time? So again, the date range is just telling us like, hey, the query is from this time to this time. All right, so if we take a look at this example and what the SQL it displays for us. So when you say, give me from date time infinity -1, so we want to say that this is infinite in the past until infinity in the future. Okay, I know it sounds stupid, but like bear with me. If you see the SQL statement that is generated, it actually omits the dates. We are not looking at any single date. There's no representation of it anywhere in this SQL statement because it knows this is an arbitrary date that we don't really need. So it omits it for you. So this makes it really powerful that we can pass in these default dates and it will just remove it from the query without us having to do any if statements. And if we do have a time.current to infinity, it means we want it to be at least time.current. And then only now we see that at the last line that we have indeed passed in the created add time, which is going to be, like this date, and the query goes on. So there's no end time, there's a start time. So this is perfect, right? Wait, there's a tiny bit of problem. There's a bug in Ruby and in turn in Rails that does not allow you to do this opposite. So it does not allow you to do from past infinity to current time, just because of the way infinity is compared. So this is not going to be a default time range because it is always going to fall back that this infinity should be bigger than a single date. And only future infinity can be the end of this thing. So there are many ways to get around it. And what I found is that using time at 0. So this will give us, like the time at, the epoch time at 0, which is January 1st, 1970, which is the beginning of time. We all know that, right? So this will give us from January 70, unlikely that you have an app older than that, and to infinity. So this will replace the start time and the end time. Then we always have values. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about is database constraints. Database constraints have come in extremely handy in an app that I work on very recently, where we had validation on few different records, but then because of the race conditions that they create, these were not enough. Active record validations were not enough to save invalid data from being saved. And the two that we used was one, the uniqueness validator, the uniqueness constraint. It's really easy to add. So once you add an index, you can specify that this is a unique index. And if you were to go ahead and add a second record with this, even though we have validation, but sometimes the validation is overridden by the race condition, but the database will not miss it. So it's very, very unlikely that the database write is slower than, your race condition. So adding this constraint on the database, this will return a record not unique statement. So this is the first thing you say, like, hey, there's a duplicate key that violates this uniqueness constraint. So this is extremely powerful in terms of like validating the uniqueness of a record that you want to do at the database level. I would think that adding the validation is still very important, but then it's like, just in case, this is a fallback that you would have. One is that you are going to be adding this index that's going to make your query faster. And two, you're going to add this uniqueness constraint on it that's always going to be making sure that you do not have duplicates that are unwanted. It's really powerful. There's also a check. So check is also a command that you can add a constraint on, which is extremely powerful. And like I was not aware of before looking up what the problem I'm trying to solve is. So the problem is on a reservation, I have a capacity. So this is how the max number of reservations. And then I also have a counter of how many people have reserved. And this should not exceed each other. Again, I have validations for this, on my active record model, but because of race conditions, this is not working out for me. What we can add is a constraint that does a check. And this check, it can take any like checks like this, where you can say this is less than that, this is equals to something, whatever that you may want to be able to pass in here. You can do regular expressions and shit. And in this instance, I want to make sure that the reservations counter is less or equals to the capacity. So I never want to exceed the capacity. So this is extremely powerful to know that there's this check underneath my active record model that's always gonna be safeguarding it even after it has passed the active record validation, because active record validation does not happen at write, it happens right before. So this is where it reads it, it validates it, only then it writes, but it does not check at that point. And this is where this comes in extremely handy.
What is the actual like SQL command for this?
This is it, outer table.
Okay. Oh, that is exactly the.
This is it. This is exactly it. I just omitted the table name because it was long. So this is outer table, that table,
Right.
add constraint, and whatever. This is the
Postgres, and
this is Postgres. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So and this like works. And when you do try to validate this will roll back your entire transaction, and this will raise an invalid statement. Active record invalid statement. So this is a little bit different from what we had before, like a record not unique. And so if you want to catch it, you want to catch it with a statement invalid. And this tells you that this violates which constraint, which is the check capacity. And we've named it add constraint check capacity. So this is what we want. You can have as many or as little as you want. And it's a lifesaver. This is extremely good, extremely important to have at that last mile, at that last clause to guard from whatever business logic you may have. Finally, two things about, like one of the many things about like Postgres. So this talk has been specifically targeted at Postgres because that's the database I use every day. And it actually has more than 72 different data types. It's an astounding amount of different data types that Postgres supports that I personally, I don't know about you, that I don't use. I probably use around the exact same 5 or 8 or whatever it is, like integer here, text there, string there. So there are a lot of different things that we can do, which also leads us to like a code smell, this is a code smell where we try to represent the data that we have in ways that it should not be represented. We try to use primitive data types to store our data, which can be used in many different ways. Some of the data types that I really like is JSONB. I don't use the money like a data type, but it exists in Postgres. Postgres knows how to store money, get the currency, and do all of that good stuff. You can do coordinates, points, whatever. There's a polygon. Never have had to use it in my life, but it's there for you to add. And there are many more that you can add. Many different data types that you can add with extensions. One of the extensions created by the Citrus team is a hyperlog log. So you can do a hyperlog log function and a roll up and all of that stuff without having to use Redis. So if you have a very small production app that already uses Postgres, you do not need a third, dependency outside of your application and your database. So like without using Redis, you can use any function that you can have there. There are way too many different extensions that are built for Postgres. But yeah. And last but not least, like I was looking up while I was like doing some of the research for this talk, I came across one of these very, very interesting projects where it uses Postgres as a queue. So it uses a queue and goes ahead and executes the like background jobs within the application without using a dependency like Redis. The author claims that you can do up to 10,000 like concurrent jobs. I don't think that's viable because like at that point, if you have like 10,000 concurrent jobs, like Redis may do the job better for you. There's few different functionalities in terms of like ensuring that you're not processing the second job twice or anything like that. But this project is extremely interesting. Uses row locks. It goes ahead and locks the row when it's being processed. And if it's if it's successful, it will delete the row. If it's not, it will release the lock for another process to go ahead and retry it. And it also it uses this thing called skip locked, SKIPLOCKED, skip locked, where you can query into your database without finding records that are locked. That's really powerful, and this is a Postgres specific feature that is being relied on by this library. And it also uses this extremely weird functionality that Postgres has out of the box. Postgres has a pub and sub like a thing that you can do. You can trigger them with channels. I'll show you a little bit about it. So you can go ahead and set up a listener, and from here it's exactly the same thing. So you can say listen to notifications. So notifications will be the name of the channel that you want to be listening on to, and every single time a notification comes in, or like somebody says like notify notifications, you will receive a record here, and then you can process it. You can process it in any way that you would like. So this is the essence of that library. It sits on top of like this, something around these queries. This is not exactly it, but something close to it. And that's how it knows that a new job has been added to the queue, and it goes ahead and spins up a new like a process to go ahead and process this job. And this is an example. So this is on the left we have the Rails console with the exact same script, and on the right we have PSQL, and you can just say notify notifications, and you can pass it any type of like a param. You can pass in strings, arguments, JSON, any type of field that you can imagine. And then like right at the bottom of the left hand side, it tells you like, hey, from the channel notifications, we receive this payload. So this is where this will also, you can also add a trigger. Like whenever something is added to the table, it will send a notification. Again, this is all Postgres, no external dependencies, no extensions added, extremely powerful stuff, and extremely unexpected. I think the word is unexpected, especially for me. Like I've been using Postgres a long time. I've never expected it to have some of these features, and there are a lot more. There are a lot more, and like things that we need to be looking at, and we just ignore. So the only thing that I know right now is that I don't know Postgres. So that's really quite unfortunate. Is I felt like I knew quite a bit of it, and the more I look into it, the more I learn about it, the more I know that I don't know shit. And like recently, I've been reading this book called The Art of PostgreSQL, and this is really a very, very interesting book where like you get to use a little bit more SQL, a little bit more powerful ways that PostgreSQL in particular. So this is going to teach you a little bit more about that, and I'm still like working my way through the book, and I've already like have had several things that I've learned from it. And yep, that's it. That's my talk, guys. Happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Is there any questions from the chat? Question from chat?
I have one though.
Go ahead, man.
Well, I think you already answered it, like when you said this is just for Postgres, because I was going to ask, are all of those SQL queries portable with MySQL, for example? But I guess it's not.
I honestly don't know. The answer is I don't know. It's like they could be, they might be. I don't know, but there may be an equivalent as well. So I think it's worth checking out. I think with the constraints, those are definitely like on MySQL as well. I don't know if they support the same data types or not. I don't know if I think MySQL does not do Postgres. Sorry, like a JSONB, like a data type. So that would be very hard to get the same type of queries, because you will not be able to like query deep into the JSON string. Yeah.
The question would be like, for example, like even though, say, Postgres has 72 different primitives, Active Record doesn't support all of that, and or maybe it does, maybe it would.
It does, yeah. So like if it doesn't, there's a wrapper that you can like either find for it or write around it that you can just like easily integrate into it.
Yeah, that is cool.
Cool stuff, man. It's Postgres is a lot more powerful than we give it credit for. They claim to be the most advanced RDBMS database in the world. They very well may be, and like the more I learn about it, the more I can see why.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a few years ago when MongoDB was the rage, then
Mhm.
Postgres came up with their JSONB
Yep.
and JSON schema,
Yep.
and they're like, okay, MongoDB's lunch has been eaten by Postgres. Then
Yep.
there's another one. I think there's another project where it's an Nginx module where it connects directly to Postgres, and you can have a CRUD database directly
Yep. Yep.
without
Yep.
running
Yep.
any application in between. So there's a lot of fancy new things that you can do with Postgres that we haven't even
I,
scratched the surface of.
Funny you should mention Nginx. There's like a billion things that you can do with Nginx that is even more powerful. And for me, I just install default and I'll be like, go do your thing. But there's a way more powerful stuff, like there's a very interesting Shopify talk where they speak about how they route to different pods within their architecture, and it relies heavily on scripts written directly into Nginx. So I don't know. Maybe this will be a talk for the future. It's like what you don't know about Nginx.
So replacing the load balancing layer and just use
So many
Nginx.
layers. So many layers. Because like the most important thing about the pods that you have at that level is the discovery. How am I able to discover which pod it's located at? So there need to be a centralized data structure that holds on to all of these. So when a request comes in and I want to know where is my pod, and this pod could move because these pods are intersectional, and then they can go ahead and so this always needs to know the latest and the greatest. So there's this like extremely big data structure that it holds, and it's like queries in there to know whenever it needs to get queried, it will know exactly where the shop is.
We have a comment on Discord saying that full
Go
text
ahead.
search is good in PostgreSQL.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It is so good I didn't include it in the talk because because I knew somebody will mention it. No, I'm just kidding. I completely forgot about it, but it absolutely is. Like full text search is extremely powerful as well. You can index stuff in it as well, so like that's really powerful. Yeah.
So they also ate Elasticsearch's lunch in this case. Usually you'll have like text search on Elasticsearch, and now Postgres can
Sure.
do it anyway.
Sure. So I feel like if you have a small to medium app, a lot of the functionality and the capability is more than good enough. But it comes like at a price when you start to have to do like sharding in terms of like your database shards and then like where your search index is at. I think that's where like Elasticsearch really shines. Like it's a lot more powerful in terms of like figuring out different shards and how you index data from different shards, and then you're able to, especially if you do like a partition where you are partitioning not by records and not like logical partitions.
Yes.
So I think
So
that really helps.
you mentioned about the partitioning, because one thing that I was going to ask when you were talking about race conditions about the
Mm-hmm.
check, right? You
Oh
solved
yeah.
it with the check. Is that when
Yep.
you have replication happening and then you have like not sharding but master application in those
Yep. Yep.
things,
Yep.
like, so it depends on which one is the closest master that
Oh,
you connect
absolutely.
with.
Yep.
How does the constraint do it? Like, is it still atomic within replications? Would you know?
Yeah. So because like especially like with this type of replication, you usually want to have just one writing and then like the other ones replicating. So that will still work really quickly on like what you want to have him.
So we said
We have a comment that check is available on MySQL. Yeah. I feel like all of the constraints are available on like both platforms.
I guess because it's SQL, right? So there
Yeah.
should at least be some kind of
Yeah.
standard on SQL
Yeah.
availability.
So there's something like extremely weird that I've also figured out in working on this talk. You cannot use alias names in your checks. So for Postgres does not support alias names in terms of like grouping, in terms of like sorting and all of that. It's extremely weird that it does not. So you are not able to do it inside of like a having like a clause. Super weird. So the aliases only work for read only.
Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience or any more comments? Otherwise, I guess Jimmy. Uh,
I think that's it. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Hans.
Thanks,
All
Hans.
good.
So,
thanks.
all right. So I'm gonna talk about my stuff, which is here. Let me share. I think I just shared the keynote without sharing my screen. Is this better? That
Okay.
is this good?
Where, where did you get this
I
image?
don't want to, because I don't want to share my entire screen. This image, I stole it from Google.
Okay.
I did a couple of talks like years ago using this background, and it was always like doing this gem deep dive kind of thing. I remember I did it for what's it? It's not device. Yeah, something. But yeah, I use the
It
same
was device.
background. Anyway,
By the
yes.
way,
Hmm?
Has Rizal Muthi says great talk in Facebook. He hasn't allowed Facebook to use his name and likeness, so uh, we can show it there. Oh, there's
Yes.
another
Thanks,
one here
Rizal.
from Shai. Good talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna
There's the one.
share.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share the StreamYard Studio so you guys know why we need you guys to uh, to give Facebook your permission to see your name because otherwise it looks like this. Okay, so like for example, Tristan has allowed Facebook to see it, but these we don't know who you are until we go and check Facebook, you know. So yeah, that's why Facebook needs to get your name, get your permission. But otherwise, it's but all's good, all's good. Or go to YouTube. YouTube doesn't have that shenanigan. Okay, never mind. Okay, let me continue with the talk. All right, I am going to talk about device JWT, and this is me. You can pause the video to read it. And I'm going to talk about this gem in few parts. I'm going to talk about JWT, a little bit about device and warden, and at the end JWT with device. And yeah, so uh, I don't really have a lot of explanation and whatnot. I'm going through a lot of stuff in pretty raw sense. So yeah, please feel free to come in and ask questions. So if you feel like I uh, don't elaborate enough, but let's go to talk about JWT. So JWT is just JSON Web Token. It's like it says here in JWT.io is an open standard, industry standard for representing claims securely between two parties. And these claims are usually, or it's always part of the payload, which we'll see how it's embedded later. And it's worth noting that JWT is not a protocol. A lot of people confuses it. For example, when they ask like, what's the difference between JWT and OAuth token, which it doesn't make sense because OAuth is the protocol and JWT is the token format. OAuth actually sometimes can use JWT to represent this token. But yeah, so that's the distinction here. JWT is just a token format. And this is how it is structured. When you look at all any JWT is separated into three parts. There's the header, the payload, and then the signature, and they are all encoded with base64 encode. So it looks something like this. You can see that the top there, you can see here that the token itself is completely encoded in JWT, and it's separated by dots. And if you separate those out, you can figure out what are those things. Like if you base 64 decode this part, it will be this JSON, and the middle part is the payload, which is any arbitrary payload or data you can chuck in. And this is the signature that is produced by running the algorithm. So if you go and check the header actually says what algorithm it uses to calculate the signature. In this example's case is HS256, which is HMAC SHA-256. And this is how it calculates the signature. It takes the header and the payload, and then there's a secret salt. Usually this is your secret key to calculate the signature. And you can verify the content of the header and the payload by using public key encryption to verify using the signature. So this is how it looks like. And I also want to touch a little bit on how it's usually being used so that we can understand how it's used in device. So here, this is an example on how you can authenticate from the server and use the authentication itself as further authentication to the application server. So, for example, the user will sign in, and it can be an authentication server, it can be in the application server. Usually, if you're doing it from scratch, you probably have your authentication with your application server, and so this is interchangeable. But anyway, the authentication part creates the JWT and sends it back to the user. Now the JWT itself will have the claim, right? So what happens is what you want to do is to have a payload that will prove or have a claim that the user is authenticated. So for example, in this case, you can see that the payload itself has a user ID. This is the issue at, which is quite common. You can usually see this in the JWT payload. This is basically just a timestamp where of when the JWT has been issued. You can also put in data like roles, user ID, all these things. But sub and IAT are the usual, are the common elements inside the payload. Sub is just the subject, IAT is the issue at. Anything else is just add-on. So you can see here the user keeps this token and makes subsequent requests to the server with the JWT. The server itself has the secret key, or if the application server share, you can put the same secret at the application server, and it will be able to decode this JWT token. If it doesn't decode, means somebody has tampered with it because it's a SHA HMAC. So anything you cannot change the content without changing this signature, and basically the signature can only be calculated if you have the secret key. So therefore, it provides security when it comes to verifying the payload. And the application server will verify the payload and then do whatever the request requires and sends it back to the user. So this is how usually JWT is being used. You can see it being used in protocols such as the single sign-on way. So because it's very easy to just uh, invalidate or revoke the token from server side. And what happens is that all the logged in session will just log out. So this is, for example, like how Google does a single sign-on. If you sign out of Gmail or something, it's basically signing out of Google account. It will be signed off everywhere, like Google Docs, Gmail, Calendar, everywhere. So this is usually how single sign-on does it. I'm not sure about how Google does it, but I know this is what Auth0 uses. And also, like for example, here is an example of how we can do API authentication. Because there's a benefit of doing uh, this way. The benefit of doing it this way is that there's no need to share session between these two things. Uh, I mean, between everything. There's no need to. So the user can use the token anywhere, and the server doesn't need to share any session data. So that's JWT. And device is just a Rails-based authentication solution for, sorry, a Warden-based authentication solution for Rails. And it's super configurable. I think if you use Rails and you have uh, a need for login, I'm pretty sure you have come across this gem. I don't really use any other gem for user authentication. So if you have any uh, good user authentication gem, do let me know. I'll check it out. But I have never had a need to find anything else, uh, uh, unless I just want to hand roll a really simple authentication solution. I usually just go and use device. Anyway, so you can see that it's super configurable. If you go to the device side, you can see that here it has like almost like 50 to 20 different modules, which you can plug and play, and it just gives you different features. Like for example, if you want the user to be able to recover their password, or to be able to register, or even use OmniAuth, for example, login via Facebook, login via Twitter. So yeah, it's super configurable. I'm not going to go too deep into this today because I'm more interested in explaining what Warden does. Because a lot of people don't really know how device work, and therefore doesn't know how Warden works. Um, so yeah, Warden is an authentication solution, yeah, for rack-based apps, and it makes sense the device is built on top of that because Rails is a rack-based app. So rack-based middleware, it's a rack-based middleware that sits after the session middleware. So if you think about rack apps, it's just a whole bunch of different layers, and those layers are called middleware. And your application processes data and from the one end to the stack or layer to the other end of the layer and spits out the response. So uh, basically, that's how Rails is built. And this Warden app is no different. It's just one layer in the rack-based application that manipulates data before it gets spits out the other end as a response. So I have made a very simple sample app. Let me just let me know if you can see it. Okay, you can, but I don't know whether you can read. Okay, so this is a very simple example of a reg app. So I have an app, reg app, using this reg builder. I define.
Yeah, you might have to make it a bit larger because our YouTube streaming is only 720p and
Okay,
it's very
is this
pixelated.
better?
You'll have to wait until YouTube catches up, but I think it will be better based on the preview.
Okay,
Yep, this is better. Yep.
okay. So this is a rack app, and you can see here that this rack app uses a middleware called rack session cookie, and this is basically how cookies, the middleware that handles cookie generation, and and then we can embed Warden here. by using this syntax called use warden manager, and you can specify what this warden manager the strategy. For example, this warden has a default strategy of using password, and it has some scopes here, which is kind of familiar, right? If you're familiar with device, you will be familiar with device scopes. It's basically just warden scopes. And here it defines a scope called user, and how do we authenticate this user is by using the password strategy. The password strategy can be seen here, which you need to add. Specifically, Warden itself doesn't provide authentication strategies, so which makes it easy. I mean, it's easy to just plug in any authentication strategy you need. So Warden is just a framework for you to do all this. So for example, here I have a password strategy that only works with one password. You can see here it only works if your password is full, and I will return you a user key that is a hash of ID 123, for example. But imagine this is a database record where you just authenticate with the password you have in the database, and you return the user ID of the data of the user. That's how it works. At the end of this rack builder, I have a lambda block that just returns an array of 3 elements. This is the requirements of any rack app, that the last layer will always need to, the app itself will need to return 3 variables, an array of 3 elements. So first one is the status, the response status. The second one is the response header, and the third one is the response body itself. So you can see here, I have a rack application that will respond 200 with the header, response header of text plain, and the data of just plain text. And let me try and run it. So if you can see here, if I have this server running on port 9292, and I'm just gonna get it. So it has error because the authentication failed. It failed with no failure app provided because I was too lazy to define a failure app. But this is where you will tell Warden that what happens when your authentication strategy fails. If you read the Warden documentation, you'll be able to see where you can define those. But I didn't do it, therefore it just fails with a runtime error. But if I pass the, what was that? So if I have a param and it's full, then it passes authentication, and it returns me the result, the response. Because what happens is the app would just authenticate and return. So if it doesn't pass authenticate, then it will fail. One thing to note is also that if you look at, let's try to debug this. Let's start it again. Let's do this. Okay. So now we're in the app, and this environment is the rack environment, and the whole Warden library, or I think its API, is just stored as this environment key called Warden. You can find this also if you run Rails. If you do request.env, you can also find this Warden. I think it's not Warden anymore, maybe. But you also find device, because that's also how device saves its authentication layer there. And you can see here that I can call authenticate here, and it will authenticate with whatever strategy I have defined. So it can be accessed anywhere from the Rack app. Well, as long as you access it after it's been injected into the middleware. So yeah, this is how Warden is safe in the environment, or in device case, this is how device also stores itself in the environment. And if you look at once it's authenticated, it also has yeah, it also stores something else in the rack session. So in the rack session, in our case, it's a cookie session, but it can be any session uh, of your choosing. It can be Redis, it can be anything, but basically in the rack app, it is stored in rack session. And you can see here that it has an additional field, additional key here that tells who are the uh, who's the user that we just authenticated. So if you have not run authenticate, this will be not there. But once you run it, this will be there. And this is also how we can validate that the user has been authenticated throughout the session. So for example, if you are familiar with device in Rails, you would do things like before action authenticate user, for example. And this is how the warden or device knows whether this user has already been authenticated or not. Is by looking into the session data and see whether there is any existing user. This is also how you can find current user in device, or current whatever scope. Okay, so this is just a simple example of Warden. Let me continue my slide. So yeah, this is Warden, and combine this with JWT, you have a very plug and play way of introducing JWT into your Rails app. If you use Warden, then I think there's a Warden JWT, but I'm just focusing on Rails now today. So if you are using Rails and you're thinking about using JWT, then this JWT device JWT gem just helps you achieve that, and it does what we talked about, how JWT authenticates and all this out of the box. And this is particularly useful, for example, if you don't have any session middleware, like for example, the cookie middleware enabled. Um, for example, if you run Rails in API mode, then I think those are disabled by default because it doesn't expect a user session at all. So if you have an API app, a pure API app, and you want authentication, then yeah, I think JWT is a pretty good choice here because you don't need to share session across different requests. So yep, like I said, device JWT could be what you're looking for. It's in this what I was using for one of the project, which I'm going to show later. And for example, this is a very common design pattern right now where you have like a JavaScript single page app that just sends API request to a backend server. And the backend server, you can use just pure and simple cookie session, which you can actually just use device for it. But if you want to run on a pure API mode, then yeah, you probably need the JWT. So let me show you the app configuration and how you can set this up. Let me share. I should probably share screen since I'm switching between apps. So many times. Okay, this is it. Tell me whether this is legible. Let me close this. Is this visible on YouTube? If not, let me know. I use Atlassian. Ooh, okay. Atlassian JWT. Nice. Take a look at that. Basically, Brand said that there's an Atlassian JWT. Is this like for Atlassian single sign-on? Like,
No, it actually follows the standard
okay.
for JWT. Yeah, but they rarely update the library, but it's in Ruby. I'm using that right now on a Rails thing I'm doing with Atlassian stuff.
I
Seems
see.
to work quite
Oops.
well. Yeah.
My cat just jumped on the table. Anyway, let me continue. Wait a sec. So to set this up, obviously you need to install the gem device, the AWT, and then in the device configuration, you need to add this part, config JWT. You specify the secret for the JWT. You specify the endpoint that would dispatch the JWT. Tun has a question which I will answer later. And also, you have a way, you need to specify the route that you revoke the request. And you can also set the expiration time for the token. So this means that, for example, when you do a post request to /API login, device JWT will dispatch the JWT token into the response header, which the client can then just save it in their cookie or their local storage or whatnot. And when they log out, for example, which is how they log out through API logout, and then what happens is that the JWT will be just revoked and from the server side, and then the token will no longer be valid. So this is the DSL for JWT device plugin. Now the next thing you want to do is that you still need to set up your device routes. In my case, because I'm writing a pure API app here, I don't really use the normal device routes, but I'm using it to set up the device scope helpers. So unfortunately, this has to be done to enable some of the things like URL helpers and define the scopes available so that I can have current user and current admin and current creators. But yeah, this is why I don't define any routes here. I actually disable everything for device out of the box, and I put the authentication within the API scope itself. So this API scope is a controller that extends device controller, and here I just have two simple. Let me show you that. So let's go to creators. You can see that this is using device session controller. I have some impersonations, shenanigans going on. But yes, authenticate creator and enable device trackable. So this is another caveat that I found that I need to do, because the device trackable plug module expects the environment to have device skip trackable equals to false when you log in for the first time, and true for the rest of your session. But because it's an API app, I don't persist the session. So every session is a new session, and therefore it is tracking all my login count. So every request it tracks login. But I digress. This is all it needs. I don't even need to specify the login. I'm using the default like inherited login and logout. And I'm here I'm just overriding the response with a JSON payload instead of the application like text payload. And there you go. I have created a login route for my API, and the login request, sorry, the login response would have a header that has the JWT token that I will save on the client later, which I will show. And I will use that to basically authenticate further API calls. On the model layer, ignore all the other crap. But basically, this is all you need to do. You need to set up JWT authenticatable, and you need to set up the revocation strategy. So this is optional, I think, but this is a good idea to have anyways. If you run JWT without a revocation strategy, then basically maybe you're just relying on timeout. But yeah, so this is basically how you would do logout for all signed in clients, for example, where you basically have a table of JWT blacklist, which has the token ID. Then all you need to do is you add it into the JWT blacklist, and that specific token will be invalid. So this is a common strategy for JWT revocation. There are other strategies as well for JWT revocation that you can check it out. I think there's also a whitelist strategy. There is some other strategies I cannot remember on top of my head, but that's it. This gem also allows you to have, let me see, payload, yeah, to have some event hooks that you can define. So remember that when we say that we want to dispatch JWT whenever we have that login happen, you can also specify different things like an after, like the after what after you dispatch what happened. So this is the on JWT dispatch method that you can call, where you can, in my case, I'm storing the JWT token identifier. This is what JTI means. The JWT token identifier is being used to identify the token for revocation. So I'm just basically saving it into the user table. So my strategy is pretty simple. I have, at each point in time, every user will have one active JWT token. And every time he or she logs out, then I will basically revoke that token. And next time they log in, I'll reissue another one. It also happens the same way if I revoke token. If I need to revoke token somehow, say for example, I need to refresh the token after maybe close to expiration time or something like that. Or if they change password, I want them to sign up or revoke the token or whatnot. I can also revoke it by just adding it to the JW backlist. So yeah, this is basically all the JWT stuff you need to do to basically set up your Rails app to use JWT. I'm gonna talk a little bit about this comment here. So Tun asks if would JWT be secure or viable enough to handle sign-ins from multiple clients. Well, depends on how you allow the tokens to be used, right? So if let's say your token is valid and you can safely assume that the claim is also valid because that the token is valid, then it's secure, right? Because the hashmag SHA-255 will guarantee that the payload is not tampered. So you need to make sure that what you need to verify security, for example, like for example, this user cannot access this other user data. Then you chuck a user ID into the payload, that you make sure that all requests would be attached with this payload, and it would need to verify that this will come from the user with the same ID, which is usually what the JWT token has as its default payload. It has a subject, which is usually the ID of the user or whoever that has the claim, and then the IAT, like the issue at timestamp, which you can use usually to expire a token. So I'm more worried about how you store these tokens on the client, which I will explain a little bit more later. Because yeah, there's no guarantee that your token stored on the client will not be stolen by some script, and they can impersonate you, which is a pretty common attack vector, I guess, for JWT. But yeah, but as long as you as the server or application accepts this payload to be a true claim, then uh, that's really not much security in that sense. Um, so I hope that answers your question, Tun. If not, please ask follow-up questions. I'll try to answer that. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you the app, and I'm gonna show you the token itself. Let me share my screen again. Can you see the screen? I hope you can see the. Oh, you cannot see the developer to. uh, this is not good. Okay, I will need to share my screen. One sec. Okay, so this is my app, and you can see that this is a purely uh, this is a view app, and it doesn't have anything tied to the backend with other than calling API requests. Now I'm trying to log in, so you can see here if I try to log in. Let's see, I log in. I sign in, and this is the post request. Yeah. So let's look at the post request a little bit. Uh, the post request. Ignore all this stuff. Let's look at the request. So you can see that the post request went through. It has obviously my payload that gets sent to the server. The server side will authenticate me, obviously, and it will spit out this thing. So this is the request header. Let's go to the response header. The response header has an authorization key, which is basically the JSON, the JWT. So this is the JWT. Next time when I need to query any API calls, I will use this to query API calls by just sending authorization bearer and then the JWT token. So if I look at the JWT token, jwt.io, you can see. By the way, this site is really cool. If it lets me, it doesn't load. Come on. La 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 la. Okay, I think it's not loading. Let me try. So if I decode it here, you can see exactly the JSON structure, right? The JWT structure. So this is the algorithm that I'm using, Hishmak SHA. The subject is the user ID of 1. This is what the device JWT adds. This is the device scope. AUD is the audience. So audience is another way that you would be able to compartmentalize different tokens. So for example, you can have a token that is for the mobile audience, a token for, I don't know, a web audience. So when you revoke, you can actually revoke different tokens instead of like revoking everything. I think that's how usually audience are being used. But you can ignore this if it's just like one. You don't segregate or separate your tokens claim by audience. Here you can see the IAT again and the expiration. So if you specify expiration date, then yeah, this is how you can store the expiration date into the JWT. And this is the JTI. The JTI is the identifier for this particular JWT token that I stored in the database. Okay, so as you can see here, all this data is decodable. So do not ever put like sensitive data here, uh, like password. Do not ever do that. So yeah, so even though you encrypt it somehow, yeah, it's still not a good idea, because basically that's not that yeah, anything you put in the payload is visible. That's what I'm trying to say. So all it does is provide authenticity. It doesn't provide obscurity. So bear in mind that's what you're getting into. Um, so remember that this JWT token, what happens behind the scenes is that after it logs in, it will save this token into local storage. And you can see here, I have stored this into local storage, like so. And then the token is like that, uh, which I will basically use later on in all my apps, different apps, API calls. And this is where you need to play with some, um, what's that? Some, what's the word for it again? You need to play with some encryption. Can't think of the word. So you can encrypt the data either in the cookie. You can also do it also in the local storage. There are plenty of JavaScript library that does it for you. Uh, so yeah, think about these strategies when you roll it out on production. This is on local development, so I turn off the uh, yeah, I turn off the encryption to debug stuff. But in production, you probably want this to be encrypted, just so that uh, you can if let's say somebody stole your cookies, they can't use it to send the request to the server because it's encrypted. Anyway, this is an example of how it's being used. I can also show you what, like for example, after I log in, there's a verify request that went out. The verify request will have this JWT token, which is saved from the login request, and so on and so forth. For example, this is the request to get the orders from the API, and there is a barrel authentication here as well. So yeah, this is an app that I did that I use JWT token. I feel like uh, am pretty familiar with it so far, and I've done some uh, uh, tweaks to it to say, for example, just now you saw things like impersonation. There are some really caveats that you need to be aware of. Basically, because of the lack of a shared session, you have to work around a few things that device provide out of the box, because device assumes that you have a persistent session for a persistent user session. Without that, then there's a problem. I'm not sure whether the Atlassian JWT would have those construct or those frameworks for to work around these things or not. Well, I'm
It's
pretty
not
sure
as it's not as comprehensive as what you show with device, where you can put it before the controller comes in. It's really just like, hey, pass in the JWT, authenticate it, or
Mm,
you can use it to generate JWT. Like that's what the library does. It's quite simple.
I see. Okay. So yeah, I don't have any other things. uh, is there any questions from the audience?
Yeah. I have a question on the token because that's a very bare token that you have, right? It's like the bare minimum. You have your
Yeah.
ID, your JTI, your expiration, all of these things.
Mm.
Uh, but I've seen tokens where like for example, on auth zero, you'll have the name and some scopes as well for your OAuth scopes, and the token itself can be very long. And if you're doing like a single page app and you're using that long token for every request, and if, for example, you're doing something like a type ahead search, then that's a lot of traffic going back and forth, right? Is there
Um,
like a best practice on these things?
Use a
'Cause usually
debug.
you'll have a token that's quite short, right? Well, yeah, it is that it bounds, but still every request, like it's a single character, but the request is like what, like 500 characters long.
But how would
If
it different from how would it differ from like a cookie session? Because you would send a cookie the
mm,
entire cookie payload back to the server anyways.
yeah, well,
So
yeah, it usually you'd like to like there are ways to limit cookie size, right? Because you can use like shorter names for the cookie. You can compress and gzip the contents of a cookie if you need like that. And usually you wouldn't want to store a lot of cookies anyway. That's why you have local storage. But this
yeah,
one you have no choice because you have to pass in the the token itself because otherwise the the hash algorithm is going to say this has been tampered with.
yeah. I don't think it's too bad because
Mm,
cookies are quite long itself. Like if you go to a Rails app, by default, the session cookie and everything is quite huge. Um,
really? Okay.
I mean, as huge as the Barrett token, I would say. If you started to store some device session into it and all these
Well,
things.
the thing about that is you only send the cookie back and forth on a page load. But
Uh-huh.
if you're doing the JavaScript XHR or like Ajax requests,
Hmm.
um, you have the option not to send any cookies if it's going through the JavaScript.
Yes, but how would you authenticate without either JWT or cookie? You either you have to
Yeah,
pick one, right?
yeah, you'll have a short that I'm just asking like, is there like a best practice on these things where if you have a very long JWT and you don't want to pass them back and forth, and
Mm,
is it recommended to exchange a smaller token inside the JWT? Like, okay, here's to your JWT, but
mm.
then for smaller scopes, like let's say the type ahead search, use this token so that you don't like spam the server with super long JWT tokens.
I think you can always have multiple tokens issued for any session. The problem is, why are you putting so many things into the payload in the first place? If those things are necessary for you to verify your session, then how would you verify that type ahead request without those data?
Mhm.
Auth zero probably uses those tokens for, I don't know, like token verification and or whatnot, which without it, then you wouldn't be able, the server wouldn't be able to verify um, uh, the you know the session whether it's logged in or not. So I'm not sure how you can get around that because it depends on how you verify your request. If your request is verified through JWT, then there's no, I mean, there's no way to work around it because what you put in the JWT is what you need to verify your user
Mhm.
session, right? Unless you have JWT and some, I don't know what other strategy that you can use.
I don't know. I'm just asking because the JWT can get very long.
So, for example, if you have a user session, if you have session store, you probably can put the session ID in the JWT and that's it. You can use the session ID as part of the JWT payload, and you restore the user session based on the JWT payload session ID. And all you have in the payload is the session ID and nothing else.
Mhm.
So, but in my case, because I don't use the session store at all, I'm basically re-authenticating every time. Uh,
Ah,
so I'm re-authenticating the JWT, not the user password. I'm re-authenticating the JWT every time there's a request coming in. Uh, but I only but not hitting the database. So I guess that's my strategy. I'm pretty sure there are flaws. Why don't
we
you?
have another question on chat.
Oops,
Uh,
sorry.
oh, sorry. Do you send the token in the request header? Yes, right?
Yep, I
It's the
send it.
authorization there.
Yeah, I send it in the request header. But it will be still the same payload size, right? KB is KB, no matter
Yeah.
where you put it. Either in the header or in the URL, it's
Yeah.
still be set to the server.
Mhm.
Although I think
Uh,
it's the length
like
of the
here, right?
token can be sort of negligible. Like I've received like huge JSON payloads back, and the JWT is still roughly that length.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
look at
but
this.
that's
Cool.
just for one request, and you can live with that one request. This is a authentication token that you have to send for every API
Right,
request,
for every
so it
session.
multiplies for every request that you have.
Hmm. I think if you
Yeah,
say
this
that,
cookie is so it's large as well.
yeah. So I think what in your case, for example, like type ahead, if you want to reduce the payload size, then remove the cookie, or maybe just remove everything other than what you need for authorization. That's all you need, right?
No, no, well, because it's your token, right? You can't change anything in the token.
So, for example, your cookie has some other stuff that is not related to session. You probably don't want to send it over
Yeah,
to
yeah,
server.
that's the cookie because you can remove parts of the cookie anytime. We're talking
Yeah,
about the token. The token needs to be sent as is. Whatever the server gave you, we have to attach to all of your API requests. Otherwise, the
yeah,
token is tampered with.
yep. So there's no workaround for that. And bear in mind, even if you encrypt the data stored in encryption in your local store or cookie,
Mhm.
if somehow your traffic is being sniffed, the sniffer
Yeah.
will still be able to see the token. So please
Hmm.
use HTTPS. So yeah, Rizal, I think that's yeah. Let me know if let's say it doesn't answer your question. Okay. Is there any other question, or is there anything else you guys want me to show for JWT or device or my app?
How about Discord? Let me check Discord. We have nope, nobody in Discord.
Mhm. Nope. Okay. Okay, that's it then for my talk. Uh,
Ah,
oh,
Rizal says means to comment to Tristan. Yeah, I think Jimmy answered the question as well. Whether it's on the header or whether it's on the URL param, if you if your token is 500 bytes long, That's 500 bytes for every request still, whether it's in the header or it's in the param.
Mm,
So I guess that that is the clarification by Jimmy.
yeah. Okay. If you don't have anything else, then I think that's all for my talk. Uh, and yeah, I think we can't. So we have another talk, but I think Ken is not reachable. So we'll probably reach him and ask him to do it on the next one.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, I'll reach back out to him again.
Cool, cool, cool. Uh,
We do. So one question though for everyone who's watching is, does anyone have any topics that they'd like to be presented or discussed? And Jimmy will present it to you. No, I'm just kidding. And we'll try to find people who are actually knowledgeable about this and try to get it presented. Like if you, I think we've had questions before on like deploying Rails applications that are not Heroku or somewhere something in Facebook. I forgot which one is it. That's not necessarily Heroku. And then there was like a big discussion there. And if anyone wants to have it converted into like a presentation, then just mention it on Facebook or comments on this video on YouTube or on Facebook, and then we'll try to find someone who can present that. Otherwise, Jimmy will present it.
no, Gui will present it. Tristan will present it. Uh, Hans, are you still here? Oh, okay. You just turned off your camera. Anyway. Yay, yay.
Hello.
Hello. That's about it, I guess. I'm sorry for all the confusion at the beginning of the stream about links to Discord, and we forgot to post the stream link to Facebook. Sorry about that. If you missed something at the beginning, please go ahead and look at the uploads on YouTube later. I will post the link on Facebook later on and Slack later on. That is it.
So Shai has a suggestion on Slack about
Hmm.
running list of topics, and I guess we can start one, and people can just add things there. I just don't know where we can publicize this, like maybe on Facebook and on Meetup. Like if you have this interesting topic that you want explored, or like need help exploring with someone, then you can just add it on a gist or something like that.
So there is
So
this
she has a
channel
suggestion.
on the Ruby My Slack called Ruby Tuesday CFP. The idea is that if you have something that you want to talk about, you can post it there. Or if you have an idea on what you want others to talk about, you can also post it there.
It's just not being used as much though.
Yeah, it's not being
So
used.
maybe
So if you guys want to try that out, maybe we can use that channel. Another question is that I want to ask the stream is that do you guys think Discord is useful? I think it's a distraction at this point. If yeah, I think we can do away with Discord on the next one, and just focus on live chats on Facebook and YouTube. Just because I don't think yeah it's it's useful. But yeah,
yeah, the original idea for the Discord voice chat is for the audience to talk amongst themselves as well, because we only have a few like slots on StreamYard, so we can't get everyone onto StreamYard. We're on a broadcast mode instead, so everyone watches a broadcast on YouTube and Facebook. But if audience want to interact with each other, or like I don't know, discuss business deals or something, then they can do it there. But I guess no, I don't see anyone talking in the Discord chat, so I
it's
guess
fine.
it's not as
It's
useful.
fine. You can just keep the channel, but I don't think I will publicize it next time anymore.
Mm,
Just because I don't think people, I don't think we imagine it like correctly how people use it. We imagine that they will just be talking amongst themselves, but I mean, why would they, guys?
Yeah.
Get together?
And hopefully hearing some clapping after a speaker finishes. But nobody claps anyway, so
We- well, well, we can install those like sound clip apps and do that instead. Okay, I think that's it. We are out of time. Thanks again for everyone. Thanks, Gui, for helping to organize this thing. And Tristan for also helping to organize. And Hans, thanks for the talk. Always,
Anytime.
yeah, uh, always nice to see your talk. It's super insightful. Always. I need to read more books, I think. uh, I need more revelation. Okay, that's it for tonight. That's it.
see you next
Bye-bye.
time.
Good
See
night,
you next
everybody.
Ruby Tuesday.
See you guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.